People often mischaracterize the Marxist position on religion in a plethora of ways, all of which vastly conflict with each other. Marxism dismisses the existence of a higher power, an aspect of its worldview that is fundamental to it. Yet, Marxist theorists directed scrutiny towards those who viewed it necessary for the state to restrict religion, contrary to what the actions of certain communist countries may suggest. Advancing the class struggle is a far more important task than combating religious sentiment, in part because of the inherent connection between the two pursuits. Granting them equal priority is seen as foolish, as it could lead to counter-revolutionary practices that threaten the class struggle. Consequently, no serious communist party would ever declare purging God from the public consciousness to be a main objective of its activity. Make no mistake, these measures are not rooted in a desire to preserve religion, but rather in opposition to measures that either renew its life or hinder the only force capable of destroying it. After all, communism proceeds from a stance that leaves no room for religious sentiment. It is irrefutable that Marxism denies the existence of concepts like God, meaning it is completely incompatible with all religion. Marxists approach reality from a materialist perspective, recognizing that man creates man and that man is itself an extension of nature. Consequently, as Marx demonstrated with an allusion to Aristotle in his work Private Property and Communism,
when you ask about the creation of nature and man, you are abstracting, in doing so, from man and nature. You postulate them as non-existent, and yet you want me to prove them to you as existing.
Asking who birthed humans is far less important than the circular movement of humans birthing humans, as it is rooted in abstract thought instead of real, observable reasoning. According to this logic, comparing an observable fact to an abstract question on equal grounds invalidates the fact, or at least makes it an abstraction. This use of personal ideas to affirm things as real leads to a truth relativism by suggesting the empirical data man observes, and by extension man itself, to not be real. Saying God exists implies that man does not. Empirical data also reveals history to be the process of humanity forming itself and raising nature through labor, providing direct and blatant proof of humanity's own origin. Using these concepts, Marx concluded that
since the real existence of man and of nature has become evident in practice through sense experience, because man has thus become evident for man as the being of nature, and nature for man is the being of man, the question about an alien being, about a being above nature and man, a question which implies the admission of the unreality of nature and man, has become impossible in practice.
God is the alien being in question and is completely inconceivable since it would invalidate what we know is valid. The Marxist effectively goes beyond the just denying God by denying the very premise of asking if God exists in the first place. While fundamentally rejecting religion, Marxism in no way strives to restrict it. Historically, measures that attacked religion have been completely counterproductive, meaning that Marxism, which bases its principles on historical experience, regards the desire for proletarian rule to ban religion as pseudo-revolutionary. On several occasions, Engels criticized socialists precisely on these grounds. For instance, when referring to Blanquist religious policy in the program of the Blanquist fugitives of the Paris Commune, Engels stated that,
"So much is certain that the only service which may still be rendered to God today is that of declaring atheism an article of faith to be enforced and of outdoing even Bismarck's anti-Catholic laws by forbidding religion altogether."
In Anti-Der Ring, Engels similarly deploys the 19th century German chancellor by asserting that Der Ring's dream of sicking police on the faithful out-Bismarck's Bismarck. These remarks refer to the 1870s struggle for culture that the newly unified German Empire waged against the Catholic Church. Following unification, the Church created the Center Catholic Party to ensure it maintained influence in the former Holy Roman Empire. Bismarck felt as though this move conflicted with Germany's ambitions, resulting in the implementation of legislation targeting Catholics to minimize the party's reach. In the attitude of the Workers' Party towards religion, Lenin described how this effort ended up backfiring, stating that
Bismarck only stimulated the militant clericism of the Catholics, and only injured the work of real culture, because he gave prominence to religious divisions rather than political divisions, and diverted the attention of some sections of the working class and of the democratic elements away from the urgent tasks of the class and revolutionary struggle to the most superficial and bourgeois anti-clericism.
While eliminating religion is not at all communism's top priority, restricting it is the very last thing we would do if it was, since, as we demonstrated, doing that is completely futile. Ultimately, only one force is truly capable of achieving this.
A
cursory glance at the conduct of the Bolsheviks may deem Marxism's opposition to religious persecution confusing. Without greater context, our position seems hypocritical at best and outright deceptive at worst. The reality is that the actions of the Bolsheviks made perfect sense when considering the historical context under which they occurred. In Western Europe, the bourgeoisie, during their seizure of power, combated the church, reducing its power and commandeering its property. These actions provided wealth and prestige for European capitalists and were materially and ideologically necessary for cementing their power. As Lenin described in his work, The Attitude of the Workers' Party Towards Religion, this had not been achieved in Russia. Quote,
"In Russia, conditions are quite different. The proletariat is the leader of our bourgeois democratic revolution. Its party must be the ideological leader in the struggle against all attributes of medievalism, including the old official religion and every attempt to refurbish it or make out a new or different case for it, etc."
Thus far, without a struggle against religion, the Russian Orthodox Church remained the country's single largest landowner and maintained a stranglehold over life and thought. If productive forces were to be developed, this land had to be confiscated, just as it was in the West. Sovnarkom's decree on the separation of church from state and school from church, delivered in January 1918, simultaneously codified the right to adopt any religion or not to adopt any at all, and declared that all property in Russia now owned by churches and religious organizations is henceforth the property of the people, thus beginning the bourgeois war against religious landowners without codifying violence against practitioners. The necessity of this undertaking was something even Anton Pannekoek, not exactly the biggest fan of Lenin, acknowledged. In Communism and Religion, Pannekoek noted the Russian struggle against religion was
scarcely distinguishable in character and content from the one which was waged earlier in Western Europe by the bourgeois materialists and freethinkers,
and
quite natural, since his struggle in Russia was directed against the same sort of opponents.
In this sense, the Soviet campaign against religion was arguably successful, seizing church property and riches, just as the bourgeois revolutionaries of France did in 1789. These seizures were absolutely necessary for the construction of bourgeois society in both France and Russia, and paved the way for the latter's socialist transformation.
As the struggle of the proletariat against its exploiters advances, as its decisive day draws ever near, religion's grip on the masses will begin to waver until the establishment of communism eliminates its very foundation. Capitalism currently acts as an omnipresent force dictating every aspect of the workers' existence, dooming them to a fate of endless exploitation under constant threat of poverty, unemployment, starvation, and eviction. Without the ability to combat or comprehend this, the worker turns to religion, which offers an afterlife as compensation for a life of toil and want, along with a supernatural being to explain life's uncertainty. This is why, in The Attitude of the Workers' Party Towards Religion, Lenin stated that
no educational book can eradicate religion from the minds of the masses who are crushed by capitalist hard labor, and who are at the mercy of the blind destructive forces of capitalism, until those masses themselves learn to fight this root of religion, fight the rule of capital in all its forms, in a united, organized, planned, and conscious way.
By directly tackling what makes religion appealing, workers become increasingly irreligious with the development of their class struggle. Capitalism, not some supernatural entity, is recognized as being responsible for the forces constantly threatening their well-being, and is progressively contested through the strength in numbers and unity that organizing provides. Instead of allowing capitalism to determine their fate, the worker takes charge of it themselves, constructing a better life on Earth while consequently losing interest in a better life after death. It may seem purely theoretical, but this phenomenon has been universally observed across many proletarian struggles. For example, in the program of the Blanquist fugitives from the Paris Commune, Engels stated that the vast majority of socialist German workers
are simply done with God. They live and think in the real world, for they are materialists.
In these instances, capitalism, the modern root of religion, still existed, yet recognizing and combating it was enough for many workers to lose their faith. It's not unreasonable to conclude that upon the destruction of capitalism, religion will disappear altogether. In Anti-Der Ring, Engels describes this very process, stating,
When society, by taking possession of all means of production and using them on a planned basis, has freed itself and all its members from the bondage in which they are now held by these means of production, which they themselves have produced, but which confront them as an irresistible alien force. When therefore, man no longer merely proposes, but also disposes, only then will the last alien force which is still reflected in religion vanish. and with it will also vanish the religious reflection itself, for the simple reason that then there will be nothing left to reflect.
With its life source as its target, the proletariat struggle is the most effective way at combating religion. That's not to say education is incapable of making doubters out of believers. It simply can't do so on the same scale. At times, it can even work against itself by standing in the way of communism's primary objective. Waging a struggle against religion, either through propaganda or by preaching, can hinder the development of the class struggle. This is not meant to reject the distribution of scientific and materialist literature that parties have historically engaged in and which Marx himself occasionally advocated for. Instead, this activity should be practiced in a way similar to how past Marxists participated in elections, by subordinating it to the class struggle. When this struggle intensifies and workers begin organizing, Marxists must direct all attention towards their activity to take advantage of the situation. In this instance, combating religion not only diverts attention away from the task at hand, but can also directly compromise the organization of workers by threatening their unity. Consider a region divided between class-conscious, consequently irreligious workers and backward, church-going, God-fearing ones. Further consider that both populations, the former of course longer than the latter, have engaged in an economic struggle which amounts to a strike. Coincidentally, Lenin spoke of a scenario specifically like this in the attitude of the Workers' Party towards religion, stating that,
"It is the duty of a Marxist to place the success of the strike movement above everything else, vigorously to counteract the division of the workers in this struggle into atheists and Christians, vigorously to oppose any such division."
Obviously, going around at a strike urging people to abandon their faith because facts and logic have exposed it as false breeds division by alienating workers who may still harbor religious sentiment, and is thus the exact opposite of what Marxists must do to ensure the movement's success. Engaging in this behavior just benefits religious institutions since, as Lenin stated in the same work,
"Preach atheism at such a moment and in such circumstances would only be playing into the hands of the priest and the priests, who desire nothing better than the division of the workers according to their participation in the strike movement should be replaced by the division according to their belief in God."
For communists to successfully draw the class struggle to a conclusion, it is crucial to recognize what activity must be engaged in based on the situation at hand. All actions must revolve around communism's primary objective, either directly or indirectly serving it. This is only possible based on the extent to which communists themselves allow it to be.
Hello, lovely viewers. I couldn't help but interject here with some important additional explanation. With all this talk about communists not actively engaging in struggle explicitly against religion, it can sound a little bit like we're advocating for workerism, or tailing the political development of the working class rather than driving that development. We very much recognize that large sections of the working class can hold reactionary positions which communists must oppose, such as the historical tendency of American trade unions to resist racial integration during the 19th and 20th centuries.
This is an interjection within an interjection. Besides obviously being completely deplorable, racial prejudice presents workers with an illusory enemy that distracts them from their exploiters, and in doing so stands in the way of organization. Of course, religious sentiments can also hinder organization by causing bigotry against other faiths, but this point concerns a specific situation where organizing is already occurring. Such situations inherently come with workers dropping those feelings and coming together, so combating the division that religion can bring is unnecessary.
We are not advocating for communists to withdraw from the struggle against religion, but for them to continue the struggle properly. In those countries where the church exists separately from the state and maintains no special privileges of its own, where there is no official state religion and such, the only way to continue the struggle against religion is by targeting its material basis, which is not the church itself, but class society. I now turn things back over to my friends on the RoseMedia team. Bluebird out.
If a communist party is to live up to its name, by sincerely devoting itself to the proletariat struggle, its program must not denounce religion. This, of course, does not mean excluding demands tackling specific issues tied to religion, which are found across many programs. For instance, the Bolsheviks' call to nationalize all land was implicitly related to the church. Instead, we refer to programs containing an explicit call for a broad struggle against religion, those written in the same vein as the Blanquist program of 1874, which proudly declared itself to be atheist, a declaration Engels clowned on and considered indicative of the Blanquists' unserious nature. For a party to champion this position is completely pointless. As we demonstrated earlier, Marxism itself invalidates religion's very basis, meaning that any program proceeding from it already addresses what an explicit rejection of religion strives to achieve. This is why in Socialism and Religion, when explaining the role of such positions in a party's program, Lenin stated that
our program is based entirely on the scientific and, moreover, the materialist world outlook. An explanation of our program, therefore, necessarily includes an explanation of the true historical and economic roots of this religious fog.
including opposition to religion only weakens a program by introducing a redundancy that dilutes it, obscuring its most important points, all of which relate to the party's primary task. This is why in the same work, Lenin stated that
we shall always preach the scientific world outlook, and it is essential for us to combat the inconsistency of various quote-unquote Christians. But that does not mean in the least that the religious question ought to be advanced to first place, where it does not belong at all. Nor does it mean that we should allow the forces of the really revolutionary economic and political struggle to be split up on the account of third-rate opinions or senseless ideas, rapidly losing all political importance, rapidly being swept out as rubbish by the very course of economic development.
communism's primary objective, the one occupying first place, is the economic restructuring of society achieved by drawing the proletariat struggle against its exploiters to its definitive conclusion. Any party claiming to be communist must prioritize this above all else. Doing otherwise shows utter disregard for communism's main task. Given its nuance, clarifying the Marxist position on religion is extremely important, lest we allow the many misinterpretations it can spawn to run rampant. Those who warp communism to match their religious sentiments must be shown to be spitting on its face. On the other hand, we must subject similar scrutiny to those who preach about the necessity for state atheism under proletarian dictatorship. Both carelessly falsify Marxism by disregarding the inherent nature of class struggle, which itself not only combats religion but is the only thing capable of erasing it. In light of this, freeing workers from the religious spell cast over them is only a secondary priority for communists. Advancing the class struggle is our primary concern, something a communist party must reflect in its program. Today, with the relatively subdued state the proletariat finds itself in, you would be correct to assume that fighting against religion by spreading materialist thought is entirely appropriate. However, we must not allow this to become habit when the inevitable comes. We must not forget that the only force truly capable of bringing a definitive end to religion's long reign is class struggle.